It's our first match of the day here for Asia Pacific. Of course, we have Europe and Americas to follow, but a full day of APAC Hearthstone will come first. And our first match of the day, a former world champion, tom60229. It's always a delight for me, in particular, getting to see his plays, because I feel like we really have a real 50-50 hit rate on criticizing his plays. Some of the times, it feels like he's making these weird plays, and we're kind of correctly picking up on it. And the other half of the time, we look incredibly stupid for picking up a former world champ on his weird plays that end up being absolutely correct.
Yeah, and also I'd say there's a 50-50 in our agreements with the decks that he tends to bring. Sometimes there's things that look absolutely brilliant, and other times there is a deck that looks like maybe he's just defaulting to his comfort picks. I remember Tom being one of the people who stuck to Rogue week after week, even though last season Rogue had 1 or 2 weeks where it really dipped in popularity. But it kind of worked out for him in the end, so where we default him. And of course, the strange deck for this week we have to keep an eye on is that Zoo Warlock that we featured, and we tested quite a bit of this, and it seemed that the conclusion we came up with pops off. It's not beatable, but know if the consistency is enough to support it as a deck choice.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if you don't have an overwhelming advantage, and significantly overwhelming by turn 4 or 5, you're kind of just dead, because you've dealt so much damage to yourself that your opponent clears the board, and then you just end up, Nephicet thrashering and tapping yourself to death over the course of the game. But as you said, Flurry with a somewhat more simple, but still kind of aggressive lineup here. The Warrior and the Priest are pretty much standard across almost all the players' lineups. It's really the other two decks where the artistry comes in, and Flurry has gone with the Mage and the Rogue. Personally, I'm still a pretty big fan of this way of going about it, and I'm also a big fan of his Rogue deck. I think this is a very cool take, a very modern take on Weapon Rogue, even if it's only been a couple of days that people have been playing this version of the deck. But cutting the Steel Dancers, focusing on more burst damage in the form of a Sinister Strike in there, I think it really plays into the heart of the deck, which is a super aggro face deck.
Yeah, the inclusion of Hooked Scimitar also really stands out to me, because you and I kept having that conversation of when you don't draw Self-Sharpening Sword, the deck kind of seems to crumble. So adding an additional strong weapon on top of that can help its consistency a little bit. I'm also very interested in Flurry's Mage list, which also seems like kind of a modern take, which has the Conjurer's Calling, but is cutting both Jandis and Shinvala, which are two legendaries that kind of help the tempo game plan, but don't necessarily get off every single time.
Yeah, a lot of debate as to whether the Jandis and Shinvala deserve their spot in Mage, with lots of not-so-nice words being thrown around to people on the other side of the argument along the way. But one match that I'm really, really glad that we get to start off with here is the Demon Hunter versus Priest. And I was testing this matchup quite a bit yesterday with Raven, and I was going to give you the lowdown on my opinion of the matchup before we had to, start the show and do our jobs. So rudely interrupted. And basically the thought process or the conclusion I came to here was that if the Priest is able to get tempo on the board, get out these big minions, make it so that Demon Hunter has to attack into its minions with weapons, that is when the Priest is winning. Because if you don't, you are eventually going to be overrun by all the damage. There's plenty enough to kill the Priest in the Demon Hunter deck.
And it does stand to reason that the Demon Hunter needs to respect most of the threats from Priest, because Apotheosis is always a possibility. One natural copy in the deck can also be generated by a bunch of Priest cards, and if suddenly that gets to heal for 4 or 5 damage, sometimes that pushes the Priest out of range of the weapon swings from the Demon Hunter. It's also worth noting that because this is Highlander, there's weapon removal available in the form of an Acidic Swamp Ooze naturally run in Flurry's deck, and also the Zephyrus in there as kind of a panic switch.
Yeah, and I guess it is worth as well, given that it's a fairly new archetype, in explaining how the Demon Hunter works, which is hit your opponent in the face. It's a little bit different in how it does it compared to the tempo versions that we came to know and hate in the last expansion. But it's the same core idea in that you equip these weapons, you hit your opponent in the face, but along the way you're running removal spells instead of developing minions of your own most of the time.
Right. There are lists running around there that have the double Battle Fiends, but Tom has gone for what seems to be the more usual version, which is heavily relying on instead the Marrow Slicers, the Lapidaries to get the damage through. There's also double Vulpera Scoundrel in there though, so it gives the deck a little bit more flexibility if things go awry. And also has that one of Frozen Shadow Weaver, which is coming down as some pretty significant board presence here, already preventing the easy trade from Flurry.
Yeah, it's really nicely done here from Tom, because you do just want to be clearing the way for your weapons to go face as much as possible. It's a weird hand at the start for Tom, it's got to be said, because he hasn't got any of the weapons, he doesn't have much of the damage. It's the only real kind of meat of this hand is Magtheridon at the moment, which is can be very powerful in the matchup, but isn't usually, I think, what you're relying on for your win con.
And while it's not relied on because there is tons of removal available for Priest here, it's an option for this turn I was looking at just to set it up, and then Tom could have followed up with the Soul Shear plus Shatter Shard Mystic to immediately blow up that board. Tom, however, just going to go for a bit of a safer game plan here. There's a chance that Flurry might be able to generate a spell that could get one of those 1/3s out of range, and suddenly Tom would be taking more damage.
True. Yeah. You want to be a little bit careful giving your opponent all those minions that they can buff up.
As for Flurry this turn, the Twin Slice that he stole is looking pretty convenient here to help him get rid of the 4-1, but I'm sure Flurry wants to save every single point of face damage that he can, so he has to be a little bit careful about face tanking and also the timing of this Raise Dead, which currently will get Madame Lazul and the Cabal Acolyte.
Right, but now that he's got Raise Dead in hand, even though it's not guaranteed anymore, Zephyrus becomes a lot more playable. I think just kind of proactively, if he were to go for, I don't know, SI7 agent here, just off the top of my head to clear off the board and get a bit of tempo, he has a chance to resurrect it with Raise Dead and play it again. It's fairly complicated as to how he should go about this.
Yeah, that was worth considering to get the Zephyrus in the pool there, but the fact that from this point on Zephyrus isn't guaranteed might be a scary proposition for Flurry, because if you use your Zephyrus and you're not able to get it back from the Raise Dead, that's one less weapon removal or healing piece that you might need later. Flurry deciding to revive his Cabal Acolyte but not go for the Twin Slice. That's a little bit surprising to me. I feel like if there's any shot for the 4-1 to go face again, then he's just going to be taking more damage overall.
I mean, if I'm going to be honest here, I think it was a case if he played the Cabal Acolyte and went, oh no, wait, I don't want to look like an idiot and activate the spell burst on nothing. No. And then just held back on the Twin Slays, because, I mean, I just think you would absolutely clear that off and get the Taunt in play. Not the cleanest start there from Flurry. And now for Tom, the follow-up is here. Sociologist Militia, even though it's not the biggest one, without having the Soul Mirror available to Flurry, this is a scary, scary board.
Yeah, and similar to how you want to play the Zoo matchup versus Priest, I suppose, is just create the biggest board as early as possible. And sometimes they don't have the removal, and you, especially running this Demon Hunter deck, if you get to connect maybe 11 damage face, then you can just go over the top of the weapons after that. And Flurry is forced to pull the trigger on Zephyrus for removal. Worst minion survives, at least from Flurry's perspective, and Tom is looking to be in full command.
Yeah, I got to tell you, Gia, these are not the kind of games, in my experience, that Priest ends up winning. Taking damage from minions, even if it's just 1 or 2 hits from a minion over the course of the game, is disaster town. You do not want to end up here at any cost.
Indeed. Tom picks up another Twin Slice as well from his Volpera, looking really great. I will say that if Flurry manages to get through these minions and not take too much damage, it's going to take Tom a while to unlock the Skull of Gul'dan, but Flurry had trouble dealing with the last board, so this board presents a similar problem.
There's kind of an interesting proposition now that he could look at of Murozond to equip the Aldraki Warblades to try and buff up his attack next turn for a lot of healing. But, I mean, I think he's just taking too much damage. He's going to die before that even becomes relevant, really.
I completely agree that he needs to remove these 2 minions immediately, and there's a way to do that without taking face damage, but it's quite expensive. It looks like double Twin Slice, Shadow Madness, the 2/3, and Blade Dance and Trade. That's pretty much the entire turn. There's a line where he steals it, then apotheosizes it, and then you can still go Twin Slice, Blade Dance, but it's just all looking a little bit short.
But then the actual Volpera wouldn't... It wouldn't even die then. So he's damaging it first, then stealing it, apotheosing it, but it doesn't even kill the Sociologist. He can't cast
he...
Apotheosis and Blade Dance.
There's just not enough mana. Yeah, no matter which way you slice it, the turn was going to be awkward, but I think Flurry did a slightly miscount there. Well, he still gets the trade in. Just decides that there was no way to get Apotheosis down conveniently.
This was not it. This was not the way to clear that board. He unnecessarily tanked extra damage there by attacking into the Volpyria. This has been an uncharacteristically sloppy game from Flurry thus far.
Yeah, I kind of hate to see it, especially since Flurry, I mean, based on his performances, has been doing pretty well to make consecutive top 8s, but we do see that he barely scraped by into the top 8 this time with a 4-3 score up against the first seed, meaning he was the 8th seed in Swiss going into the top 8. Tom takes a very easy victory and is beginning to prove, I think, that this Demon Hunter has a lot of potential.
Yeah, I will say at the start there that Flurry didn't necessarily have the best hand for the matchup. In my experience, I'd rather be playing the Galakron variant just because it has more mid-game meat, which I think you really need to actively develop onto the board to counteract the Demon Hunter's minion development. But even then, I think we could have seen more argument for developing a Zephyrus more proactively. You don't have to save it for weapon removal in the matchup. You can just try and get it down on the board to start developing. And at the end there as well, that's the real culprit. It's just, it's not the way that you approach the matchup.
Yeah, even though the Zephyrus is somewhat arguable, it can't be denied that Flurry had 2 very sloppy turns, the one at the end there, and you and I agree, and I think it's very fair to say not using the Twin Slice to get rid of a 4-1 when it was pretty clear. And so I do hope that Flurry pulls it together for the rest of the series because he will have to face that Demon Hunter again, as this is last hero standing.
Oh yes, that is the real spice of week 2. The Demon Hunter could get a full sweep, which I personally wouldn't be too upset to see, but before we can see it, we're going to have to go to a quick break before we come back and see if Tom can dominate all the way to a 3-0 sweep with his Demon Hunter.
제가 그러지 못하기도 하고 그래서 이제 그런 재밌는 사람이 되기를 원하고
둘 중에 하나 선택해야 된다면 제일 똑똑한 사람이 되고 싶어요.
I would rather be the funny man than intelligent man, but in fact I think I am the intelligent man, not funny man.
我会选择做一个最快乐的人吧。就是最快，因为我觉得，在一个很多人的地方的话，很多人的地方很需要有一个就是很懂得搞气氛的人，不然会很无聊。
I feel like being the funniest person in a room requires a lot of energy. It's very exhausting, I feel like, and I'm just more chill, laid back. I'd rather be the most intelligent person.
比较搞笑，比较开心啊，可以让很多人开心啊。
Do you think you are the most intelligent person in this room?
Do you think I am the most intelligent person in this room? No, I think Soro is the most intelligent person in this room.
Correct answer.
Welcome back to our first series of the day here in Hearthstone Grandmasters. It's week 2, so as I was saying, early days. All of our players here in Asia Pacific, and of course across all 3 of the regions separately, have a chance to get through to the World Championships later on this year. But they also have a chance to be eliminated, so they're going to have to be playing at the top of their game, which didn't quite feel like Flurry was doing in that first game. He does, however, have a couple of chances to turn things around now, Gia, with his aggro decks. Given that this is last hero standing and he lost with his priest, that is out of the way for both the weapon rogue and the tempo mage. He's going to have to try and take down the demon hunter, which might be a little bit difficult, I anticipate.
Yes, the demon hunter certainly is very scary in terms of racing, but I do think that Flurry's weapon rogue has a pretty good because demon hunter these days, I think certain lists have been cutting one if not both I-beams, so the healing becomes a little bit limited. Eldraki Warblades is their main way of getting back the health because the soul fragments do not necessarily get drawn all that consistently. I think that the rogue has a chance to maybe get under the power curve of the demon hunter and deal a lot of damage before they can even heal back up. So I wouldn't count Flurry out just yet.
I definitely wouldn't either. There is the key tech card, however, or I suppose I should say actually couple of key tech cards in both the Swampoos and the Shadow Weaver for Demon Hunter, for Tom on the Demon Hunter, and we definitely know last expansion wise how powerful Frozen Shadow Weaver can be against the weapon classes. So I think the Rogue could be a bit of a weak spot, but even then, Flurry is still lining it up first. He clearly likes his chances with the Rogue more than the Mage, which I'm not necessarily sure I agree with.
Yeah, looking once again at the text from Tom, that does look like a pretty fortunate side benefit. I don't think that running Ooze and Shadow Weaver would mean that Tom wants to queue Demon Hunter into into Warriors, for example.
Right.
I still don't think that the techs are enough to swing that matchup in favor of Demon Hunter, but maybe Tom was anticipating the mirror a lot more and still has that additional benefit, stopping Rogue a little bit more consistently. However, these stealth minions at the beginning will prove very annoying for Tom before Blade Dances are available, or Shatter Shard Mystic.
Yeah, or Coin Shard Shatter Mystic on turn 2, because he was able to nail the, what is that,
gosh.
one of Spirit Jailer in his... Oh no, that's the 2. He's got 2 Spirit Jailers, but even so, a disgusting start here for Tom right out of the gate.
And while Flurry had the option to go for the Sneaky Delinquent on 2, I think makes a lot of sense for Flurry to set up his dagger and use that Toxin Blade that he's summoning next turn to try and clear the path for Spy Mistress to get more than one attack in before it gets traded down. Twin Slice served very effective for Tom last game, and it seems to be the most flexible option once again for this game. Spectral Sight, while it would be in the outermost in this turn, probably wouldn't get outcastable next turn, so I like this.
Yeah, I was thinking he does need to be a little bit afraid of running out of value, but you've got to trust the top of your deck. In the end, I absolutely agree with you. The Twin Slice is the way to go, because as soon as he finds an Eldraki Warblades, every single point of damage that he can get on his weapon is huge.
And especially the decision to coin out Vulpera at all, despite it being a low tempo play, makes it so that if Flurry wants to do his on-curve play of Toxin Blade, yes, you can dagger down either the 2-3 or the 1-3, and the Spy Mistress can go face, but whatever gets left for Tom can trade down the Spy Mistress, and then he can just Soul Shear the other minion. So it's great that Tom prioritized board presence here, and now Flurry has some reason to even keep his Spy Mistress stealth.
In the end, he's just launching it face. I mean, this is a face deck, especially his version of it that's cut some room for Sinister Strike in there as well. It's definitely going to be a tough climb to get there, though.
Yep. And so Flurry does decide to just feed his Spy Mistress because he kind of knows that the hand, oftentimes as Rogue, you give up on board presence by this time in the game and just want to get as much weapon damage to face as possible. Tom manages to get a very clean clear there. No board presence at the moment, though.
Oh, this is just my absolute least favorite type of rogue hand, though. Like, using all your weapon buffs on the dagger, especially a one-charge dagger here, it feels so bad. Like, Krastinov next turn to upgrade it to a 4-2, brilliant. You've now spent all your resources to just equip a True Silver.
Yeah, It does feel awful. Flurry is pretty much relying on this cutting class, probably the turn after this one, to bail him out. There's secret passages in there to make things a bit more hopeful for him, but Tom has had answer after answer so far. And he has yet again a very nice turn. Soul Shear Ooze wants it.
This is really the turning point, though, isn't it, for Tom? He needs to ask himself, is it worth it to throw down the ooze here, or does he have to save it for the self-sharpening sword later on?
Well, to me, if he throws down the ooze here and Flurry's response is self-sharpening sword, go face, then Tom can start pushing for the race instead. He has the lapidary next turn. He has that second twin slice that he discovered. I think the ooze makes a lot of sense here. Flurry gonna take another turn to set up a... And this one looks like it's finally going to, if not stick, it will take some of Tom's face damage to deal with it.
Yeah, it's at least going to be doing something. And I think you bring up a great point there about the race potential of this Demon Hunter, because it's, I think, one of the instances of the name of the deck somewhat incorrectly warping perceptions of what it should do. It's called Control Demon Hunter. It's really not that much of a control deck most of the time. It's just a hit your opponent in the face deck.
Very similar to what Flurry's trying to achieve, but consecutive card draw could be pulling Flurry a little bit out of this hole. However, because we talked about racing, that 5/5 huge for Tom here. The board presence is very, very scary. Flurry has not picked up Secret Passage, but he does have that Sinister Strike 1 Thief in hand, threatening a lot of potential damage to the face.
That's just right. And every single soul fragment that starts to come through now, even just 1 or 2 at a time, is a big difference in terms of stabilizing the board, as is the Shard Shatter Mystic as well.
Oh, that is a huge pickup for Tom now. Doesn't have to heed those minions whatsoever. Had he not picked up that Shatter Shard, we could have seen Frozen Shadow Weaver coming down instead. But now Tom is just sitting on so much damage in hand. Flurry with hardly any time to respond.
Alright, One Thief needs to find something pretty impressive here for Flurry in order to dig him out. We were looking for damage. We were looking for Ice Barrier to survive the hits from his opponent. We weren't really looking for these, it's got to be said.
But he might have to just take this 5-mana deal too at this point, because if he goes Flame Ward, then the 5 damage gets to connect face, and Flurry has to know that Tom has not even played a Marrow Slicer yet. I think Flurry can try to put together a meager board plan, because rolling Fireball plus double Worgen at least gives him initiative on board.
Flame.
Choose soon.
Well, while we fix that issue with Derek's mic, it does look like Flurry has decided to go for Flame Ward instead. They're prioritizing getting the self-sharpening sword down. He's betting that Tom's hand is not the uber-aggressive type, and also there's the added benefit of maybe threatening an ice barrier here from Tom's perspective. Tom gonna go ahead and test it, gets the news that he does have the lethal.
Yep. He gave it his best shot, and I think bluffing with the secret was probably the way to go. But in the end, it's not enough. 2-0 for the Demon Hunter here. And Flurry on his last legs. You've got to remember as well, with last hero standing, you're not going to queue up the deck you feel most favorable with last. You're going to try and get the counter as quick as possible. So for Flurry, he clearly, I'd have to imagine, does not rate his chances any better than we do right now.
Yeah. Although, looking at the archetypes at least, you and I thought that Mage gave Flurry a better chance in this matchup than the Rogue. So it's not to say that he's not out of it just yet, at least against the... But if Flurry wants to take the series, he does have to run that Mage into many matchups beyond this one. So it's looking not too great for Flurry. I will say, though, that the Mage has done more amazing things in the past.
It has. I think it's also worth mentioning at the moment, even before we get into Flurry needing to play with the Mage, that while we've been mainly focusing on Flurry, I think that Tom has just been playing some very solid Hearthstone with the Demon Hunter deck. He seems to know the way to approach it very, very well, when to make that switch from the defensive maneuvers to trying to actually kill your opponent, which really is the heart of this deck, when to actually pull the trigger and start killing your opponent. Which I think we can definitely come to expect from Tom. Whether he's practiced this deck a whole bunch or has just picked it up recently, It seems to be he has that kind of natural, innate ability to figure out the heart of a deck very, very quickly.
Yeah, I don't think we have seen any particularly extremely tough decisions yet for Tom, but once we get to those moments, we'll really see this deck shine because the deck wants to operate as both removing and dealing face damage at the same time. The perfect example was when Tom had the Shatter Shard Mystic top deck to remove, but also got to push the Lapidary face that turn. When he gets into those spots where he has to choose between removing and trying to race and deciding which of those is his best win, I think that'll really prove how much knowledge he has of this deck. Already, right off the bat, a full keep there. Marrow Slicer, I definitely agree with. The Chaos Strike, to me, is a little bit surprising as a keep, but it could be that Tom just sees this as a curve. Soul Shear on 2 into Chaos Strike plus Hero Power, then frees up the I-Beam from the left side.
Yep, that seems to make sense to me. You do want to have the ability to clear off these 2 and 3 health minions, you know, just making sure that you can take out a tempo Sorcerer's Apprentice is very important, killing off the Firebrand and all that stuff as well.
And off the bat, Flurry immediately ripping that Arcane Intellect. I wonder if there was any room to think about a tempo Firebrand that turn. It is weak to exactly coin Marrow Slicer, though.
I think the main thing for him here is that Firebrand doesn't really achieve what he wants to do here. He needs to start setting up as soon as possible for these really powerful combos. Whereas Firebrand, you know, even if it doesn't get cleared off on that turn, it's chunking away for 3, which is not going to win him the game.
Yeah, I think that's a very... What Flurry really wants to do is hit that Apprentice and be able to develop a board at the same time he generates spells. And there's one particular spell that would be huge, even though it's not naturally included in the deck. Frostbolt. We were having this discussion with Raven. Should it start being included in the deck naturally? Just because there are so many weapon classes at the moment, it can really put a damper on Tom's counter. But Flurry taking the box there might just be a case of all the other cards were not good enough.
I mean, I can respect it. I think I would have probably gone with a Pexis Blast there, just for a little bit of extra damage to face, most likely, towards the end of the game. But Puzzle Box can be a lot more damage to face towards the end of the game.
Yeah, but the problem with both of those cards, it feels like, is you need time to play both of them.
Yeah.
And Flurry clearly does not have that much time with the curve Tom has been having. If he wants to continue the game plan, has an on-curve Lapidary to go. However, it is scary to just play that while a Firebrand has hit the board unchallenged.
So we could, of course, try and save up for Soul Shard plus Blade Dance on 7 in order to get that 5 damage sort of AoE on most of the minions. But that's pretty slow. How does he fill up the board in the meantime?
He could still go for a push back onto the board. The I-Beam makes for some pretty efficient removal here. He could go something like I-Beam, Volpera, Spirit Jail, Hero Power, I-Beam Volpera, or he could go I-Beam Volpera, Spirit Jailer, and leave the Firebrand. But if you're making a push onto the board, I feel like he needs to remove the Firebrand.
It's tough, right? Because one of the things that I feel like Demon Hunter can do quite powerfully here, or one of the tools in its arsenal, is deliberately not putting anything onto the board, because most of Mage's cheap spells, be it Devolving Missiles, Ray of Frost, the Brain Freeze as well, they all need something to target. So as soon as you get this on the board, weirdly enough, it actually starts to activate the Mage's hand.
Good point. And Tom, in the end there, went for the Lapidary and dealt with the Firebrand. So you can see then at the very least what he did was try to stick some minion presence to go face instead there. Where with the top deck, second Firebrand though gets a very, very easy answer. And while you make a great point about the targeting as something that you don't necessarily want to give to the mage, while there's no apprentice to go off with the turn, I don't feel like it's necessarily that scary yet.
I think I agree. Yeah, I think given how likely you are to find some way to utilize Blade Dance over the next few turns, you're allowed to play the Soul Shard Lapidary there. It's just always something I try and consider against the mage, because if you can just lock their hand in place, you will just find the time naturally by playing out the game to simply kill them.
With the consecutive plays for board, though, has now managed to put Flurry in a reactive position. This could very well be the Cyclone turn.
That's what I'm looking at, I've got to say.
And even though the Rays of Frost are not really freezing too much damage, as you said, it's just ways to activate the Mana Cyclone for Flurry's perspective, hopefully generate him more threats for the coming turns. Even a single Frostball could buy him some time.
Not the worst.
Very reactive cards.
Yeah, he really wanted a little bit of extra damage. Even just learn Draconic, a 6/6 on the board in 2 or 3 turns. It's too slow. But Tom finding Glide, is this a GM debut? Everyone was talking about how nutty this card would be. And it's just deleted the majority of Flurry's hand.
Oh my god, it's also made Flurry's average quality pretty bad. Now there's just Rolling Fireball in there. Vaporize that Flurry certainly doesn't want to draw on its own. Oh my god, that's the greatest Glide I've ever seen. And the first time I've seen it on GM as well.
That was insane. That was absolutely insane.
And these picks are all very slow for Flurry. I mean, the Violet Warden is a much-needed reprieve. It's just a taunt minion.
I wonder.
There is an argument for Kirintor draw 4 that I would hear out, but yes, it's a taunt. He needs to find some way to not be dead instantly.
And it's getting to the point where even though Frost Nova tends to buy you time, not against this deck that wants to deal damage using the hero power, using weapons, and not so much using minions. However, the Pyroblast feels extremely slow, so he does just end up taking that Frost Nova.
This is the game plan now. It's somehow get a big giant down, you know, maybe he gets a spell damage minion so he can hit Cram Session into the Apprentice, and then you freeze, hope they can't remove, and hit them in the face a couple times.
But this draw for Tom is absolutely kind of a crossroads because it looks like a pretty clean Lapidary get rid of the 4/7 turn, but if he goes for that, there's a high chance the Skull gets locked in by the next draw. But then he could play the Skull on the left, right?
Right, yeah, I can agree with this play overall. It's tough, right? You want to force your opponent to play reactively, because even though earlier on I was talking about keeping all their spells in hand, Tom's just kind of deleted most of the spells from Flurry's deck at this point.
Strangely enough, this could be the way to make Frost Nova get some work done. He can get down the Mana Giant the same turn, because that's been generated. Mana Giant also gets cheaper. That's a cheap spell damage minion, so he can do pretty much everything he wants this turn.
Or he could just go Violet Warden Frost Nova, which is very likely to completely stop any damage at all.
I really like the look of getting down both the Mana Giant and the Freeze. It allows Flurry to somewhat race. The 5/5 would remain a problem for the next turn, but he has been sitting on these 2 Vaporizes. I feel that if Flurry wants to win the game, he also has to deal damage to Tom.
So are you thinking it's actually not a Frost Nova turn, it's a Vaporized turn?
Oh, I think it's Frost Nova this turn, plus the Giant, and then set up the Vaporized next turn. It's just the problem with Vapor is he would have to double trade into the Volpera to isolate the 5/5.
That's the plan.
Okay. Well, this does make it so that he can go Vaporize on consecutive turns, whereas with my game plan, you're likely going to be stuck with 1 unusable Vaporize.
And it's instantly met with Tom going face. I think correct, because he had the chance to just hit lethal right there. And even if it goes wrong, he has the freeze to stop himself from dying this turn.
Yeah, that Shadow Weaver is pretty much locking out the game for Flurry, I believe.
In the shadows.
So he has that box in the deck. Okay, it's not there.
So if he can generate a Frostbolt on this turn.
Oh, it was 1 too deep.
Or
okay, time.
Violet Warden, but there's K and Sun Fury in the hand.
Oh no. That's probably just gonna be game. Of course, Flurry's gonna take the taunt, most likely, and survive from his perspective.
What to do? What to do?
Isn't he? It's just saving him more damage than a potential Nova or Vaporize here.
You got to be thinking about what is your win con overall. Like, if you go Astromancer, maybe that's his like best chance of winning the game if you just praise that every point of damage is at the bottom of Tom's deck. Like, it's unlikely, I 100% agree, but he needs a miracle at this point to have any chance.
I think he just needed to survive until box. But then again, looking at the board, there's actually more minion damage threatened here than weapon damage, so I can also get behind a Frost Nova turn instead.
Yeah, the game plan is quite clearly just wait until box on the next turn and hope that that can get you there. But, Gia, it is not going to be enough. No secrets in play. Marrow Slicer, Kane, second slice. Tom is not going to miss this in a million years. And we have a very APAC way to close out the first series of the day. A super quick 3-0 sweep. And Tom just looking absolutely on fire.
I can't believe I was calling this a control deck last week. I just feel very, very stupid. Oh my goodness. Very clean from Tom here, and has to be kind of disheartening for Flurry. That's 2 sets now that we've seen him play on stream and just kind of get swept aside by the opponent. Flurry's game 1 definitely looked a bit sloppy, but later on there's very much he could do in the face of that glide, although it was pretty cool to see glide put in that much work at all, even though generally I'm not a fan of messing with your opponent's fun directly.
Yeah, it was just a great spot there by Tom to just completely destroy his opponent's deck. But it does feel to me like the continuation of not a great season last season and this season for Cloud9 in general, really, with Flurry and Dawn right on the brink of relegation. Kalento, obviously, unfortunately, in the European region, being relegated out of Grandmasters. And not the best series for Flurry, it's got to be said. The first game, very, very sloppy. He, I think, was able to turn things around a little bit in the next 2. But it's just really, I think, the power of Demon Hunter is once the Warrior is banned out of the way as the premier anti-aggro deck at the moment, Demon Hunter, I think, just comes in so brilliantly with all the heal, the removal, and all the damage. It's so perfectly positioned to take on the likes of Rogue and Mage as well. And I think just very deserving from Tom. Good lineup. Even though we didn't get to see the Zoo once in that series, he still has just been showing great stuff with his Demon Hunter so far.
Yeah, I think Demon Hunter fills a very similar position to Bomb Warrior, at least in the way that it operates, which is a lot of the time if you put down a board, they'll use a spell to deal with it, but they'll use their face to start racing you. And while Bomb Warrior does that a bit more consistently because of the way they draw their weapons and can also benefit off of the bombs in the deck, Demon Hunter is no slouch whatsoever. And this is a lineup that we were praising from